Have you ever tried to figure out what a child is really thinking or feeling, especially when they just can't find the words? Well, that's the everyday world of a very special kind of expert, the psychiatric nurse. Today, we're going to open up their unique toolkit and see exactly how they assess and support kids who are facing some really complex neurodevelopmental disorders. And if you're wondering just how important this is, well, take a look at this number: 1 in 5. Right now in the US, about 1 in every 5 children and adolescents is dealing with a mental health disorder. I mean, think about a typical classroom. That's several students in that one room who are struggling. It just puts the urgency of this work into a whole new light. And this quote, right here, really hits home why this is so critical. We have this idea that mental illness is an adult problem, right? But the research is clear. The seeds of these struggles are often planted way, way earlier, more than half of the time, before a kid even hits age 14. So you can see why getting that assessment right and getting it early can literally change the entire course of a person's life. So here's our game plan. We're going to kick things off by looking at the hidden struggles of childhood diagnosis. Then we'll get to know the specialist nurse and unpack their assessment toolkit. After that, we'll dive into the different interventions they use. And finally, we'll see how all of this work ends up supporting the entire family. All right, let's dive right into our first section, childhood's hidden struggle. We're talking about the really unique challenges of figuring out what's going on with mental health in young kids. So, what makes diagnosing a kid so much harder than an adult? Well, for starters, they're a moving target. Their brains and personalities are changing so fast that what looks like a symptom might just be a temporary developmental hiccup. They often don't have the words to tell you what's wrong. And on top of all that, you've got these bigger problems, like schools and doctors not always being on the same page. All this can lead to a wait-and-see approach, which is just a dangerous delay when you know early intervention is everything. So, who steps into this incredibly complex situation? And that brings us to Section 2, where we meet the star of our show, the psychiatric nurse, a highly skilled specialist who is trained for these exact challenges. Now, a psychiatric mental health nurse isn't just any nurse. These are specialists who use proven, evidence-based methods to build a complete picture of a child. And it's not just about spotting problems. It's about seeing the whole child, their strengths, their family life, even their cultural background. It's a truly holistic approach. Okay, so we know who they are, but how do they actually do this work? Well, that takes us to Section 3. Let's take a deep dive into their assessment toolkit. You know, to really get the full picture, a nurse has to be part detective. They're gathering clues from all these different areas at the same time. They're looking at developmental history, like when did the child start talking or walking? They're digging into medical and family history. And they're conducting both neurological and mental status assessments. It's like a 360-degree investigation to make sure absolutely nothing gets missed. And this, right here, is probably the most crucial thing to understand about this entire process. You can't just take an adult assessment and shrink it down for a kid. The whole approach has to be totally fundamentally different. It has to be redesigned from the ground up for a mind that's still growing and changing. And here's what that really looks like in practice. For an adult, you're asking about abstract things like their mood or their thought patterns. But with a child, the nurse is observing. They're looking at cognitive skills through little tasks, watching how the child relates to other people, and, this is the big one, they're analyzing how the child plays. For these specialists, play is data. It's a direct window into a child's inner world when words fail. So the assessment's done, a picture is starting to form. So what happens next? That brings us to Section 4, interventions. We're moving from play and observation to actual plans. Now, a core ethical rule guides every single thing they do. Always use the least restrictive option you can. Think of it like a ladder. You always start on the bottom rung, which is just talking, having a discussion. If that doesn't work, maybe you move up to suggesting a timeout or offering medication. It's only as an absolute final last resort when a child is a danger to themselves or others that you would even consider things like seclusion, which means being in a room alone, or physical restraint. It's a very careful, thoughtful, step-by-step approach. And that therapeutic toolkit is incredibly diverse. We're talking way beyond just talk therapy. Nurses are using stories in what's called bibliotherapy. They're using drawing and painting and expressive arts therapy, along with things like music, journaling, you name it. Each one of these is like a different key that can potentially unlock a child's inner world. But let's zero in on one of the most powerful tools in that kit, play. You know the saying, play is the work of childhood. Well, for a psychiatric nurse, it's also a clinical instrument. And here's why. Traumatic memories often get stored in the nonverbal parts of our brain. A child might not be able to talk about what happened, but through play, they can act it out. And doing that helps move those painful memories to the verbal processing parts of the brain so they can finally start to heal. To really see this in action, let's talk about a 6-year-old boy named Seth from our source material. He witnessed something no child should, the tragic death of his grandmother. And afterward, he changed. He pulled away from everyone, he was anxious all the time, and he was having these awful nightmares. So the nurse brought him in for play therapy. She gave him some dolls and toy cars, and he started using them to reenact the accident, over and over again. He was confronting his fear and his anger in a safe, controlled way. And the results were, well, they were remarkable. After just 4 sessions, Seth started talking about happy memories of his grandmother again. And his mom said his anxiety was finally starting to fade. It's just a perfect example of this therapy in action. But Seth's healing journey wasn't just about him. This kind of work never, ever happens in a vacuum. And that brings us to our final section, supporting the whole family, and really understanding the ripple effect of this kind of care. You see, a child's well-being is just so deeply connected to the well-being of their family, and that's why family counseling is almost always a key part of the treatment plan. The goal isn't to fix the child in isolation, it's to strengthen the entire family unit, to give everyone new tools to cope and support each other. Because when one member of the family starts to heal, the whole system gets stronger. At the end of the day, this is complex, life-changing work. It really depends on a team, the child, the family, and that highly skilled nurse. Their toolkit is sophisticated, their approach is holistic, and their impact, well, it can be profound. Which kind of leaves us with one last really big question. A child's mental health depends on a team. Are we giving the nurses on that team the support they need to succeed?